Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our March 2021 Third Tuesday at 3 webcast series, also part of our next normal series of webcasts this spring. Today, we're focusing on apps and systems. My name is Alan Falcon. I'm the CEO here at Cumulus Global, and I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy day and week to join us. Before we get into the heart of the webcast today, a reminder to everyone that the audio is muted. This helps prevent any background noise from disrupting the session here today. So if at any time you have a question or comment, in the upper side or right-hand side of your screen, there's some icons. One of them opens the questions window. That's the best way to ask a question or make a comment. I'll address them as we go along. We also have time for Q&A at the end of the session. This, as always, is being recorded and it's generally posted to the website within a few hours, certainly within 24. Feel free, we'll send you a link once it's available. Feel free to share it. And for those of you watching the webcast, we do end the recording before the Q&A session. We'll provide you contact information should you have any questions or want to talk about any of the information in greater detail. This webcast and other are part of the many resources in our resource center. We've got a number of recent webcasts we've done listed here, including the first two components of our next normal series on Third Tuesday at 3, IT efficiency and work from home and remote. The other webcasts listed are a mix of Third Tuesday and 3 and our Coffee and Cloud series webcasts as well. Some of our recent topics that you might find of interest. Please check out the Resource Center on our website at any time, not only for webcasts, but for white papers, ebooks, and other helpful, timely information. And we're also updating our blog on a fairly regular basis. So as we head into next normal and why we're doing this series, it's because really with the onset of COVID-19 nearly a year ago, there was a big scramble. And when we look at where we are now and all the adaptations that have been made and how we run our businesses with respect to operational issues and work from home and remote, we see a number of major changes. And so we're looking at the impact of COVID-19 on how we run our businesses, and more importantly, how best we can move forward as we transition out of the core of the pandemic and our workplaces and our lives tend to, starting to open up a little bit, and in various degrees and various waves, fits and starts in different regions of the country. So in this webcast, we're focusing on applications and systems and how we can most effectively and efficiently run, use, access, and support them as our businesses evolve and as we return, hopefully, to growth within the economy and within our businesses as well. So when we look at that, there's a lot of term about hybrid computing, and hybrid just means a mix. And so I think right now we're facing a new type of hybrid, and this is really the balance between people who are working in office and people who are working remotely. And that could be work from home, but we're also seeing an increased trend and increased utilization of co-working space, and we're seeing more users who are working mobile or transiently, where they may be at home, they may be elsewhere throughout the workday, but they're not in office per se or any set location. And really dealing with the new expectations, knowing that how and when we work in the office is going to change for many of us, and these changes possibly could be permanently. We now know that jobs we thought needed to be in-house can be done remotely, many more than we previously thought or previously were willing to try. At the same time, however, we are learning how important in-person interaction and engagement differs from remote communications and video meetings, and the value that that in-person interaction brings to the health and well-being of our team and our businesses. And so while many of us have worked predominantly remotely or heavily remotely over the last year or months, whatever, many of businesses are realizing that giving up the office and being full remote all the time may not be the right answer. And so we really see that an expectation that many of our team members that traditionally needed to be in the office will continue to work remotely. It may not be all of the time, but it'll probably be some of the time. And so there's a new type of hybrid, not only where you've got in-office workers and remote workers. I think we're going to have more people who are doing both and are hybrid workers themselves. And this poses certain challenges beyond the cost of supporting that type of infrastructure. When remote workers access in-house systems or apps and systems of any type, we face 4 key challenges above and beyond that cost. And those really around how do you implement, how do you run, and how do you support that access and the efficient use and effective use of your applications and systems. And it really boils down to an acronym PARS, P-A-R-S, performance, availability, reliability, and security. And so today, as we talk through the issue of apps and systems and the next normal, we're going to put things in the context of those 4 parameters. We're also going to talk about cost, but those 4 parameters, because you are replacing one method of operating your business with another, you really don't necessarily want to sacrifice, or you need to be judicious on where you sacrifice any of those 4 factors. And certainly you want to be careful about what happens from a cost implication. So there's some significant challenges and issues we want to deal with, and we want that to be effective for you. So what does remote access look like? Well, here's an old school diagram. You've got your devices over in the lower right corner, a laptop, a smartphone. Okay, there's a BlackBerry in, maybe that's not so current. But mobile devices, they connect to the internet either by Wi-Fi or by cellular data service. That's great. Heading in from the internet into your on-premise location, you've got your internet or broadband service. And the goal there is to go through some sort of device that ensures that pathway is secure. And then internally, you've got your on-premise PCs and your application servers and your on-premise resources. So when most small businesses scrambled at the start of COVID-19, they were figuring out ways to get people to access their applications and systems that were still running on-premise, physically in your headquarters or in branch offices, where have you, and using this general model. And there's some limitations here, particularly around the infrastructure required, the cost, the complexity, and what you need to do to support, and knowing that you've got people who might be on a laptop when they're out of the office, but now working in the office sometimes as well. And what does that look like? And so when we look at the different components, I'll go back here for a second. I'm going to start and sort of walk through these 5 components more or less in order and talk about the relationship with PARS and what that means. So we start with the device, and it comes to PARS. You're really looking at ambiguity of a device, right? It's computer, it's tablets, it's smartphones. And the other challenge you face is really about security and control. And so when we think about performance, availability, reliability, and security, think about who owns the device. Is it company owned or is it BYOD? And if it's BYOD, is the company allowed or able or by policy managing that device and what's on there? And the reason that's important is because that really gives you the control of security. And if it's company owned, it gives you more control over the quality of the device and the capability of the device, particularly which will lead to performance indicators and could very well affect availability and reliability of the device itself. Right? So clearly, a BYOD unmanaged device poses the greatest risk to your business from a performance, from a security standpoint, as well as the other factors. A company-owned device where you control everything on that device, how it's configured, which device gets purchased, lets you really ensure that you're going to meet your performance requirements and you're going to provide the appropriate security. BYOD falls in the middle, right? And there are different cost implications and operational implications to consider as you balance, cost of device, cost of management, the performance, available, reliability, security as trade-offs. Connectivity, there's 2 aspects to connectivity. It's the mobility service that your mobile devices outside of the office are using, as well as the internet access that gets those communications back on premise into your office. And this can be a hugely limiting factor for small businesses keeping their computing on premise. So mobility service, most devices are set up to talk about Wi-Fi and or cellular data, right? So cell phones, if they can't connect to Wi-Fi, unless you disable it, it's going to head over to your expensive cellular, your data plan. Wi-Fi performs better than cellular, etc. Most people forget to look at their office internet access, right? How much bandwidth do you have? And is it symmetric versus asymmetric? And what do I mean by that? So symmetric means the same upload speed or download speed for someone in your office. Now, historical web browsing, you could have a slow upload speed because you're just typing in a URL, and a really fast download speed, which gets you the web page on your screen faster. But if you're running an application in your office on a server and someone's working from home and they're connecting to that application, the data going up to the internet from your office is the data going outbound to that user. And so your upload speed is as important as your download speed. So you want those to be symmetrical. And that also fits in with the overall usage pattern and what's happening. And so when we look at it, your data needs to move quickly in both directions. We need to remember that wide area network speed and internet speed is never as fast as your local area network speed of what people are going to see in the office. And that gets into the performance and the reliability of your network as you're in this hybrid environment. So how are small businesses doing remote access today? Well, on site, they've got their application servers, and a common way is to set up a VPN. You install a VPN client on your laptop, you connect securely in. It's great. It's a secure solution. It puts the remote device, logically, if not physically, on your internal network. The downside with VPNs is that logging in can be complex and troubleshooting can be extremely difficult because it's an entire layer of communication protocols that's sitting between the operating system and your software and the end user. Additionally, performance is limited by the overhead created by the VPN service itself. There's a lot of traffic the VPN needs to use to manage the connection and the encryption and things of that nature. And you combine that with the limitations of wide area network and cellular speeds versus local network speeds, having a remote device functioning in the same manner it would have was on your internal local area network, performance is usually poor and can cause user frustration and even create errors in applications. The cost for VPN is very moderate. It's affordable. You don't necessarily, sometimes you might need a gateway if you've got a lot of people VPNing in, but in many cases you don't. And the clients aren't, the software you're purchasing and the support isn't that expensive. So it's a moderate cost, but it has some risks with respect to performance, availability, and reliability, tends to have very good security. The other method we see a lot of small business users having is remote access, where they're really remote to PC. And this is where you're installing a piece of software like Go to My PC on a desktop or laptop that stays in the office physically somewhere. And then from outside, you have a computer, maybe it's your personal computer at home, you run the software, you connect to that internal device, which in turn is on the network. And the only thing that goes back out to your remote system, the one, at your desk at home, is your input and output. So the screen displays come out, the keyboard and the mouse clicks go in. And that's great because it solves the bandwidth problem, right? You're not moving large chunks of data. It's just the screen and the keyboard and mouse IO. Maybe some audio is going with it. So you do a pretty good job of mitigating the bandwidth issue because, again, you're actually not doing your computing on the computer at home. You're doing all your work on the computer that's physically in the office and operating at LAN speeds. The downside here is that troubleshooting is problematic. If something goes wrong with that host computer or there's a connection issue, you need someone on site to facilitate corrections. And so a problem after hours or late in the day can fester for a significant period of time. Additionally, oftentimes when these are set up, the default level of security is pretty minimal, so it creates an opportunity for hackers to get in, and the cost is high. Why? Because I'm now one employee, I've got a computer on my desk, and maybe I've got a laptop, maybe it's a home computer, or you've assigned me a laptop at home, so it's two devices now for one employee. So the cost there can be a little much. The third way that we see small businesses provide remote access is local remote desktop. And this is where behind your firewall in your computer room or closet, what have you, whether it's a physical servers or virtual servers, you run desktop hosts that run an image of a PC virtually within a larger server, a gateway that facilitates the connection from the remote computer, as well as your application servers. And so the local remote desktop creates that secure tunnel all the way from your remote laptop at home into the virtual desktop that's running within the server. So performance is good. It can be limited, however, based on that underlying host server performance. You can provide really good availability and reliability because it's server-based. It's easier to manage and administer than remote to PC is, although you might still need someone to go on premise to make corrective actions. Security can be well configured. Here, the cost is expensive. Why? To do this, you need multiple servers, virtual or physical, to create the basic infrastructure, which you then have to expand based on your usage. And so you have both an upfront capital cost for hardware and software, as well as an ongoing operations expense. And so for most small and mid-sized businesses, you won't be doing enough remote desktop to warrant an environment large enough to take advantage of any economies of scale. And so this tends to work better for mid-sized and larger enterprises who have a large remote desktop need, where they run it themselves locally on premise. For small and mid-sized businesses, this can be become a costly endeavor. And so when we look at those three aspects, now it is to say that here you have the best performance option, the best availability, the best reliability, and potentially the best security of all the options we've discussed, but it also comes at the highest cost. So again, there's that trade-off. And so when we look at how we solve the problem, what other options you have, I want to talk today about something we in the industry call lift and shift. And this is where we're really going to talk about moving applications and systems to the cloud. And there are a number of ways to do it. In fact, there are 6 R's when we talk about lift and shift: rehosting, replatform, repurchase, refactor, retain, and retire. Okay. And we're not going to focus on retain or retire, because that really says, oh, you don't need the application anymore. If that's the case, we don't want to worry about it. You should retire it anyways. And retain is maintaining the status quo. And we don't believe that maintaining the status quo is going to serve our business as well over the next 1 to 3 years. So let's take a look at rehosting, replatform, repurchase, and refactor options and how they work specifically for businesses like ours, small and mid-sized organizations. So when we look at it, inside your system, you've got your environment, you've got a system that's running on a server in a computer room, in a closet, in a small data center, and you want to move that up into the cloud. Rehosting, replatforming, repurchasing, refactoring are all ways to get there. So what are they and how do they differ? So rehosting, as the name implies, says you're moving your existing servers to cloud servers with a similar configuration. So effectively, and it's, this is oftentimes in its raw form what IT folks will call lift and shift. If you've got a Microsoft Windows server with an SQL database-based application, and the application's running on that server, you're basically going to create a nearly identical version of that physical server as a virtual or cloud server up in a platform like Google Cloud Platform or Microsoft Azure. We connect in and provide remote access either by VPN or through remote desktop services. We optimize it for performance and to manage costs. And within that rehosting, you get the whole ecosystem: identity management for security, login, log out, access controls. You can provide your backup recovery, and there's some built-in continuity services that you can enhance in those environments. And you have the ability to aggressively and appropriately manage your security, your permissions, and take care of things like data loss prevention. But effectively, you're taking something that's physical on your site and moving it to something that is logical up in a cloud service. And it has some advantages. One, you switch from capital expenditures of hardware and software and dealing with annual maintenance contracts and monitoring and physical maintenance of the server and that environment, to having it hosted in the cloud where operating system updates happen and can happen automatically as part of the service. You've got more flexibility. It's more scalable. If you need more memory, if you need more processor, you can adjust it up or down without having to, buy and hardware, migrate, shut down services, things of that nature. And so rehosting is sort of the basic foundation of how we get from on-premise into the cloud. Replatforming is another step beyond that. And that's where you're not just moving existing servers to cloud servers, you're also moving them to services. And so here you might rehost on a similar or new platform. And while you're doing that, modify portions of the architecture. And so a good example is you have a database application that runs on SQL Server. As you move it into the cloud, you might not build an application server and a SQL server. You might build an application server and deploy the database in a SQL service that runs as a cloud service, right? Additionally, you might move from on-premise. You might have had an application server connected to a network access storage device or a storage area network device for high volume storage. Moving into the cloud, you might take that application and connect it to immediate high performance, costlier storage, midterm and long-term storage based on the age or the relative use of the data. There might be a good way to do that. And so those are the types of architecture changes you might make. The most basic architecture change we see is the ability to connect business applications to your collaboration suites. So for example, if you've got a business application and that runs using Microsoft SQL Server or another popular Windows Server platform database, when you move that into Microsoft Azure, well, if you're running Microsoft 365 as your productivity suite, you've got Power BI, which has connectors into those systems. And so you can start taking the data that used to be isolated on an application server or in an application database and bring it into your productivity suite, gain better exposure, improve reporting, real-time dashboards with drill down. These are the most common ways that we see a benefit to replatforming. And what's nice, and I'll talk about it in a little bit more detail in a moment, is you can start with a rehost and you can replatform in phases and steps as independent projects. Repurchasing, the name applies, you're throwing out what you got and you're buying new. Most often you're replacing an existing system with a new cloud solution. You're moving from your traditional version that runs on a physical server some way to the SaaS version. So the best example for small businesses is all the businesses have moved from a desktop version of QuickBooks to the QuickBooks Online service. You went from an on-premise application to a cloud-based service. Other examples are taking local contact and CRM tools and converting to Salesforce or Dynamic CRM or Copper or any of the other, Jumpstart, any of the other CRM tools out there available as SaaS services. And it's not just finance and CRM, they're marketing tools, they're manufacturing, they're distribution tools. We've seen tools for managing field service technicians for HVAC companies. There's there's project planning systems. So we see people who move from the physical version of Microsoft Project to Project Online. We see people who use other project management tools move into things like Microsoft Planner and Trello, Hive, and others. As you do that repurchasing, you have the ability to integrate that new SaaS service with your cloud identity and your productivity suites as well, which again is an enhancement. So you're replacing. Now, one of the challenges with the repurchase or replacement, if you will, is oftentimes the SaaS version doesn't offer the same features as your on-premise version did. We've seen that. And also they typically don't offer the broad range of customization or third-party components. And so we've seen a number of customers that have, Sage 100 accounting systems, but they've integrated modules or applications from third parties. Those third-party applications they need, it's part of their business process and how they work. They don't integrate yet with the SaaS version of Sage. They can't move it. So repurchasing is an option, but it has its limitations. And when it works, it can be very cost-effective and very successful, but you really have to understand the limitations and make sure you're not sacrificing anything that you need from a data or business workflow standpoint. And finally, there's refactoring. And this is rarely done by small and mid-sized companies because most of us as small businesses don't have the resources to have applications custom built, or we don't have development people internally or that we contract with directly to custom build our applications. So refactoring is when you reimagine how the application is architected and developed, typically using the cloud native features. And it's great because it adds features, scales, and performance. You're leveraging cloud native services, but it's an entire new architecture that generally over time needs 100% rebuild of the application. And so, this is where you see large corporations rebuilding applications natively in AWS or in Google Cloud Platform or in Azure using the microservices and the other services. They're rebuilding it with the AI and the machine learning in it. That's great. Most of us in the small and mid-sized business space don't have the resources to do that. And so we look at lift shift and the cost benefit of the different ways. Here's a simple relative graph that says, how inexpensive to expensive it is, what's the amount of effort and skill set required to make that move, and how long does it usually take. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, the most complex is the refactoring because that is software development, testing, regression testing, all that fun stuff comes into it. You're changing the architecture of the application at the same time you're rethinking it in its entirety. Sometimes the least expensive or at least effort and quickest is just repurchase. But again, you've got those roadblocks, right? It can be low cost, quick and easy, but If you don't have the functionality that you need, then it's a bad move. And if you need integration with third-party applications and tools, they may or may not have it, or they may require a third-party tool to move data between their application and other applications you have, which adds another layer of complexity with your data, with your workflow, and with how you manage information as well as your cost. A little bit up the scale from repurchasing is rehosting. Takes a little more time to migrate. It's a little more expensive, some additional skill sets to do, but it gets you up into the cloud, gets you running the way you are. And of course, replatforming is a little beyond that because you're going to make some architectural changes. So if we focus on the model, let's throw out refactoring because for most of us here in the SMB space, it's not relevant. Rehosting generally provides the best value for most small and mid-sized businesses. Okay, you maintain your systems, you avoid issues of capability and integration, and you have the option in most cases to re-platform and make some architectural changes and take advantage of the cloud ecosystem over time. You can do that in phases. And so the impact of rehosting, whether or not you do some re-platforming in the future, it will improve your performance, your availability, your reliability, and security. The way people access your application will be the same whether they're in the office or remote. You can manage the availability. You're in a tier 1 class A data center. You've got that reliability built in. The back-end internet access into those data centers is effectively unlimited. So you eliminate half the performance equation at least. And those environments are secure and they give you the tools to secure your systems and applications. Particularly when we rehost, we're creating private network segments on dedicated resources. So you are separate from everyone else who might be in that data center. The chance of being impacted by what other people do is negligible. And so you can have a predictable migration with lower risk. And again, you're able to re-platform and make incremental improvements in phases over time, which gives you, the ability to do cost benefit, the ability to assess what changes and how you want to run your business, update workflows. It really facilitates it. So what does a rehosting architecture look like? This is a snapshot of a sample project. And this is one of the reasons why we say don't, build remote desktop and virtual desktop infrastructures in-house, because you can see that there are a number of components. You've got your remote clients in the upper left-hand corner. This is an Azure type of solution, so it integrates with Office 365. And sort of in that virtual network that's private to you, you've got your gateway server that presents the web client as well. It connects to the server that does your domain control and your DNS and your files, and it sort of brokers and manages the connections that then get you to your hosts, which is where these virtual desktops run, and the applications and the servers that you're running. And then behind the scenes, you've got your data arrays. And what's nice about this is it's a private network, dedicated server instances within that multi-tenant environment. It's device agnostic. You can do it through the web browser. Sometimes people want the thin agent on their mobile devices, the remote devices. That's great. The resources are scalable. I can add session hosts. I can add application servers. It's a very efficient use of your internet bandwidth when you're in the office. Think about it. If I'm working in the office and I'm in the cloud, I've got 10 people in the office. I've got 10 people who've got traffic going to and from the Azure data center, using this example. If I have 20 people who are working from home, I've got 20 people going to and from the Microsoft data center using the internet connection at their homes or at their co-working space. If I had built this in my office, I now have 10 people who aren't using the internet connection very much because everything's local, but now I've got 20 people who are coming in and moving data up and down the internet connection. So I've doubled the load on the internet connection for the office by having people remote in. So having folks, and having your application centralized in a managed cloud service really gives you more efficient use of your network bandwidth. And the fact that it's thin client or thin agent or browser-based access to get to a remote desktop, that virtual desktop in the cloud, that then you run your applications on that high-speed network, it gives you the performance, in the scalability of resources It makes it more effective, and the user experience is the same for people in the office as well as those working remotely. So if you have users who move back and forth, they're not going to think, oh man, I don't want to go into the office today, but sometimes when I work from home, it's really slow. You avoid those types of issues in that decision. People can work wherever they need or wherever they want to be most effective, without having to trade off performance, reliability, availability, or security. The other component of moving out, moving out of your office and getting these servers and this infrastructure into Azure or Google Cloud Platform or another rehosting architecture, is you've got built-in continuity. That these run as services. You can build in redundancy at multiple layers, and really balance your need for redundancy and the cost. And so you can really look at the cost value proposition of how much redundancy do you need to ensure your business continuity is appropriate to what you need, and balance that with the operating cost. And because costs are based on usage, right, we can do things. So we've worked with companies, for example, where they'll have, they need their system running 24 hours a day, but only a few people would ever need it overnight. Whereas the majority of the company, would never ever log in before 5 in the morning, would never ever be there after 11:30 at night. And so we can actually program these environments to spin down and not pay for resources that aren't needed between 11:30 p.m. and 5 a.m. And even have a trigger that if there's an unusual situation where, instead of 5 people needing it overnight, 6 people, 6 or 7 people, you can automatically spin up the additional resources when they're needed. And so there's a lot of flexibility to manage the environment, manage the cost, to ensure the performance, availability, and reliability, not sacrifice your security, and keep things, budget friendly. So some reasons to move, right? Now, I've talked here about performance, availability, reliability, and security as reasons if you've got people working in the office and remotely, and some people doing both, to get your infrastructure, apps, and systems out of the hardware closet or out of the computer room and up into the cloud. There's some other life events of your business that warrant taking a look at lift shift where it makes sense. So one of them is end of life. So Microsoft is a little more aggressive now in how quickly they're retiring prior versions of Windows, Windows Server, SQL Server, etc. And so, for example, if you're running Windows, and we have customers who are still running Windows Server 2008 or SQL Server 2008, those are way past end of life. There's no more support. Something goes wrong, it's there, or your hardware is getting old, right? And so you think about buying new servers, you're buying the hardware, you're buying the operating system, you're doing the data migration, you have to rebuild or rethink your backup strategy. All of those components and costs come into play. The joke in the industry, it's the forklift upgrade, right? Because you're not just, when you buy a physical server, you're not buying for your need today. If you're expecting that server to last 5 years, you're buying the infrastructure that will provide the capacity over 5 years, or will provide a basic system that meets your need now, that you have the ability to expand into what you're going to need incrementally with more purchasing over the next 5 years. And so whether it's hardware reaching its end of life, or you're facing end of life in your operating system or key, infrastructure components like database, engines, that's a good time to say, hey, before we spend the money and make a capital expenditure and do a huge migration, from one box to the other, where the only benefit is really new hardware and software to run it on, you're not really gaining any new capabilities. Maybe it's time to lift shift or move that up into the cloud, where for that migration, we got a scalable environment where we can manage costs. It's operating expense instead of capital expenditure. And it enables a whole set of other benefits, such as better data connectivity out to your collaboration tools, better access to information, improved security, and more embedded tools that help ensure your business continuity. The second life event of your company is if you have multiple locations, right? And we see a lot of companies that have a headquarter and 2 or 3 branch offices. That's great. If their computing's at that corporate office, maybe with a local server for local files, you've got this hub and spoke system that puts a lot of demand on the internet connection, on the infrastructure at that headquarters office. And again, you're building out infrastructure to serve all those offices. And you're either on dedicated internet, networking lines, which are very expensive, or you're VPNing over the public internet where you don't have as much control over performance, and you're adding all of that overhead. So if you're operating in multiple locations, whether it's headquarters and remote offices, or headquarters and employees at works, co-working spaces, or even an expected percentage of people each day working from home, moving it from on-site to in the cloud sort of takes that hub and spoke out of your office and puts it in the data center. And know that the capacity from a networking and systems standpoint and a traffic and management standpoint, that what Microsoft or Google or Amazon can provide is that data center is significantly greater than what we can do as small businesses out of our computer room or the closet or a small data center. The third life event really gets, really deals with the COVID-19 shift to more remote and mobile users, right? And the benefit here is that it's easier to establish secure connections with minimum overhead when you're cloud-based than when you're trying to build that infrastructure internally. There's a setup, there's an acquisition and deployment cost, there's ongoing maintenance. Those are, become entirely your responsibility. Whereas when you move to the cloud, you've got the infrastructure pieces in place, you've got best practices, you've got standardized settings you can leverage to add those services where you're not responsible for everything. You're responsible for administrating the settings for how you want to use it, but the service itself is being run by a Google or Microsoft or a third party that operates in either one of those environments. And so again, reduces your management, your administration, protects your security, provides performance, available, and reliability. You've got your PARs there for your remote mobile users. Fourth issue is business continuity, and this is more critical. I know here I talk about in the slide, protecting from hardware failure. Hey, if you're operating in the cloud and those devices, they're not physical servers out there. They're virtualized. They're spread across data centers and instances. Something goes wrong, easy to reprovision, move over. It's not a physical thing you're managing directly. Additionally, it limits disaster risk, right? The level of disaster that it takes to bring down a large corporate data center, tier one data center, is significantly greater than, an event that might, as simple as a car hitting a utility pole that might pull the electricity from your office. And geo redundancy is available. In fact, in the Azure environment, you can have no redundancy if you really don't want any. You can have locally redundant, which means it's redundant within the data center, or you can have it be geo-redundant across multiple data centers in different regions of the country. And you can balance, obviously geo-redundancy is more expensive than local, but you can balance your risk and your tolerance with your needs and your budget and come up with the right mix and right solution for your business. And it's all part of the process. And so you can improve your resiliency of your business, not just from hardware failures, but even from other types of risks, data risks. There are ways to snapshot and protect data that's in cloud servers that is more efficient than getting data from an on-premise server up to the cloud and back down. So even for software failures or hacking events, recovery times, etc., can be greatly simplified in the cloud environment. So a need for better business continuity is another life event, if you will, in your business that would warrant making that lift shift move. And let's not forget about transformation. And everyone who's heard me talk before knows I really don't like the term digital transformation because it's really not about digital. It's about thinking about how your business operates and your workflow and what is best for your customers, for your business goals and objectives. The technology we have today makes it easier to use technology to facilitate that transformation. And so if you're thinking about changing transformation, whether it's automating existing processes the way they are, or rethinking your workflows and how you work, and then putting in technology to support that, and encourage and enforce, if you will, it's easier to start if you're in the cloud because the infrastructure is there. It's easier to remove redundant services. It's easier to connect data between systems themselves and with your collaboration tools and bring the information for effective decision-making to the people in your business who make those decisions. And you've got an entire ecosystem now, whether you're in Google Cloud Platform or Azure, there are entire ecosystems now with low code and no code development and automation that give you the power and the ability to do that automation, to do that programming, and to that really, implement your workflows and your business processes and guide your users so that those policies and procedures are followed as well. And so this is the value add in many cases in moving to the cloud, is that this is an enabler. I'm not saying you have to do this. I'm not even saying you want to do this in all cases, but it's an enabler and it's there for you. And so taking a step back, when we look about lift and shift solutions and getting your servers out of your closet, out of your small data center or your computer room into the cloud, starting with rehosting, doing re-architecting, if you will, over time or even as an initial project, what's the PARS impact? So from a performance standpoint, to summarize, you're working with direct internet access, you've got minimal overhead and complexity, your availability, it's from any device securely, 99.9 or greater uptime with the services we use and recommend. You've got the reliability because there are fewer points of failure. There's fewer pieces. It's not a physical server with backup software and application software and VPN software and local software to do identity management. You've got one system now that's providing those in an integrated fashion. You also have high availability options if needed for reliability. And then with respect to security, you've got integrated security that you layer in as needed. And there's some basic components as far as login, encryption at rest, encryption at motion, but you can add more as you need. And it's easier to implement multi-factor authentication and single sign-on services when you're in a cloud environment natively, as opposed to when you're hybrid. You don't need to spin up an SSO server or an SSO service that connects with on-premise equipment. It's all in the cloud. It's all designed to work together. There's a lower cost. There's a simplicity to set up. There's a simplicity to ongoing management and administration. So across performance, availability, reliability, and security, the PARS impact is pretty significant. And so what's your next action? What's the next step that you want to take? Again, we start out always with assess, right? Let's understand your business objectives and outcomes. Let's look at your current inventory of systems and applications, how your business functions and how your workflows happen. We'll look at your current needs and we'll look at your current readiness. Some businesses aren't ready. Some businesses need certain systems on premise to operate properly. Let's understand that. Let's map it out. Let's do what's appropriate. Next is now let's look at the value proposition. How much does it cost to go from A to B? How much is it going to cost to operate and maintain? What kind of savings does it, trigger? Is it better to be operating expense or capital expense for your company financials? And of course, there's the opposite side of the coin, which is what's the cost of inaction? What happens if you don't make a change? How does that impact your business and what are those costs? And look at the two combined, define that value proposition. If the value proposition is there and it warrants the investment, then it's time to plan. Let's look at the strategic direction, come up with the tactical projects, the phasing on how we're going to get there. Let's understand the changes to the services you're using and how that might impact workflows and users, make sure we're improving efficiency and improving our ability to empower your team to be the best they can be at their jobs and in their roles. And then you pull the trigger and we execute. So that said, I've covered a lot of ground as far as apps and systems. Feel free, now's a great time to open that questions window and ask any questions you might have. We're about 45 minutes into the hour. At this point, I am going to go forward one more slide. Well, first off, for those watching the recording, know that you can reach us here at info@cumulusglobal.com. Our toll-free and standard phone numbers for the switchboard here are on the screen. If you want to reach out to me personally, that's great too. I don't have an assistant. I will tell you, don't call, email. Email is always better. afalcon@cumulusglobal.com. Feel free to reach out. So for those who are watching the recording, I want to thank you for doing so. Please share the link with others if you feel it will be value to them. And if you have any questions, reach out to us here at Cumulus Global or to me directly. And at this point, I'll stop the recording and go back to the Q&A session for the live folks. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day.